It's suffocating.
Family and friends. These isolated individuals completely disconnected from reality. Kenneth Brown, 2020.
War, pornography, genocide, racism, self-hatred, suicide, and violence as a postmodern art exhibit. Kenneth Brown, 2020.
Question is, can Tucker Carlson win in 2020? Short answer is no, he cannot. When you look at the margin of victory that Trump saw in 2016, you see that in very key swing states, Trump cannot afford to lose any support. I mean, we're talking about margins of tens of thousands of votes in these Rust Belt states, as well as Florida. He just can't afford to lose any support. The question is, has he gained support or has he lost support? Well, let's look at Black Lives Matter. And before people just come out and say, oh, the polling's false, it's wrong. Remember 2016, they said Hillary had an 86% chance of winning, according to Nate Silver. But what were the margins that they were saying? They were shifting the polling data by 5%, maybe at most 10%, right? They were saying Hillary's going to win 60% and she only won 49% or something, right? So they were shifting the numbers by 5%, by 10%. They weren't shifting the numbers by 15, 20, 25 percentage points, right? So you can say that the polls were biased and that the polls were out of whack. But let's look at this newest data. Let's see what it's telling us. This is New York Times, How Public Opinion Has Moved on Black Lives Matter, June 10th. In the last 2 weeks, American voters' support for the Black Lives Matter increased almost as much as it had in the preceding 2 years. So you're seeing that closer, we don't go back as far as I'd like here. It goes back to maybe 2017, perhaps around a Virginia rally or protest. And you're seeing that essentially the majority of Americans did not support Black Lives Matter until the beginning of 2018, at which point things started to flip, things started to grow. And in the last 2 weeks, it's just skyrocketed. And they talk about how on a lot of issues, Americans don't really change their opinions. On gun control, according to this chart, now again, it depends how you ask the question, but it's saying 8% were in favor of gun control in June 2017, 7% are in favor of it in June 2020. So public opinion hasn't changed much. There was a little spike during the Parkland shooting, and then it went back down again when people forgot that happened. Impeaching President Trump, it was 1%, now it's 7%. As soon as impeachment was announced, it had a little spike. Again, 6 percentage points, not a lot. Russia, friend or foe, people who were saying that Russia was an ally, went from negative 39, so 39%, I guess, what would that be? 50 plus the net support they take, the people who support Russia versus people who are against Russia. Negative 39 to negative 59. That's a pretty steep decline in terms of public opinion, but it's sort of a smooth graph over time. We might get back to that one, how exactly that happened. Border wall with Mexico, negative 12, negative 10. Legality of cannabis is raised from 32 to 43. Tea Party support has stayed the same at negative 20. Immigrant path to citizenship increased from 24% to 26%. Alt-right has gone from 53 to 54, so pretty much stayed the same. That's negative, by the way. Government and environment. Net support for stricter environmental protection has increased from 27 to 30, and gay marriage has increased from 28 to 35. So all of these show us a baseline. if their data is biased, and maybe we can say it is biased, maybe we can say that, on immigration, that those are fake numbers, they're false numbers. But the point is that the methodology that they're using is giving us a baseline to understand, like, let's say net support for citizenship is not 24 to 26%, maybe it's negative, right? But what it's showing is change over time, that however they're sampling, however they're asking the questions, however they're biasing it, the shift over time is pretty stagnant. Like, you're seeing over the course of a year, you're seeing increase in support for gay marriage, you're seeing decrease in support for Russia, you're seeing a slight increase in support of impeachment. A lot of these are pretty much staying the same. The biggest one, I think, would be gay marriage, would be a +7. You're looking at maybe cannabis support would be a +11. Russia support has declined by 20 percentage points. So those are all big and significant. This one we're looking at -4 up to +28. That's a 32 percentage point shift in public opinion. So this is very significant. And the argument I hear a lot of people making in terms of a Tucker 2024 in order to justify Trump 2020 is they'll say something like, there's no Trump supporter who would be against Tucker, and Tucker might even pick up some like of these, anti-SJW leftists or something. This is the argument they'll make. But that's not true. Not every Trump supporter will support Tucker Carlson. We're going to go into two reasons. We're going to go into the shift in public opinion. We're also going to go into the reasons why Trump really won, which had nothing to do really with ideology. We're looking at the shift in support for Black Lives Matter 2 weeks ago versus now. So where we've ended up. Democrats support Black Lives Matter 84%. Blacks support it only 82%. So the Democrat Party is actually further. They support Black Lives Matter more than black people do. You've got Republicans at -39. Okay? But Republicans have still shifted toward Black Lives Matter. You look at this little bar here, showing you that in terms of blacks, it's made very little gains. Very little gains. If I had to take a look at this graph, if the black line is the 50% mark, then when we look at, I want to make sure everything's getting in the frame here. Might have to shorten my my screen a little bit to make sure of that. So when we look at the little black line, then what we're seeing is that's the 50% mark. So we can roughly say that these segments are on average somewhere between, 2 percentage points up to like 5 to 10 percentage points. The Republicans have shifted toward Black Lives Matter. And you hear Donald Trump's rhetoric where he's basically said, we rest in peace, St. George Floyd. What has Mike Pence said? Rest in peace, St. George Floyd. Tucker he's not in line with Trump. Tucker has criticized Trump on foreign policy effectively. Whether he calls him out by name, but he said our immigration policy is not very good. He's criticized him on the immigration. Tucker's not there. So the assumption that Tucker is palatable to Trump supporters is actually questionable when you look at the response he got on the Syria strikes. When Tucker opposed going to war with Iran, you see the response he got from his audience. It wasn't positive. Tucker is an ideologue. Trump is not. Trump is Bill Clinton. By the way, Bill Clinton's not going to save us. So if the idea is, that Tucker is going to be Trump's third term, we don't need a third term of Bill Clinton. Tell me one area where Trump is to the right wing of Bill Clinton in the 1990s. The only thing about Trump is he hasn't changed, right? He's a Bill Clinton supporter who just didn't change with the times. Therefore, he said it's 2016. It's time to bring back Bill Clinton. That's not going to solve any problems. That is going to allow for cultural change to continue while maybe on a policy level things slow down, but the culture continues to accelerate. I'd rather have a situation where the policy is changing rapidly and the culture is changing slowly. I think we've gotten the opposite under Trump. When you look at every one of these groups, from young people to older people, they're all moving toward Black Lives Matter. Every demographic group here is pretty much in support except for Republicans. The reason Trump won in 2016 is not because he was an ideologue. It's not because he was to the right of Bill Clinton on any issue. He was to the left of Bill Clinton on sexuality. He was to the left of Bill Clinton in many ways on immigration. When you actually listen to what Bill Clinton had to say about building a border wall, border protection, enforcing that. When even things on trade, the rhetoric, of course, Bill Clinton brought us NAFTA, but the rhetoric of protecting the working class. When you look at what other issues, criminal justice, Trump is to the left of Bill Clinton. So it's pretty hard to think of a single issue where Trump is to the right of Bill Clinton. And the idea of just going back to Bill Clinton, it's actually it's worse because it's a deception, because it's a dedication of time and energy into a political system that chews you up and spits you out and destroys your morale and causes this blackpilling phenomenon that people talk about. To skip to solutions, if people want to know what are you supposed to do if not support Trump and Tucker, there are basically two options. You either integrate yourself into the system via academia. That's really the way forward. You integrate yourself into this new religious structure. You become a priest. You become a professor. You social signal all the right ways. You learn how to do that. And white people can be very successful doing that. Look at Bill Gates. Look at Jeff Bezos. Look at these people who run the Democrat Party. Look at Nancy Pelosi. Look at, was it John F. Kennedy Jr., or maybe he's not the best example. Some of the Kennedy family. I forget all the names of them. There's a redheaded one. You look at some of these people who ran in the Democratic primary. Swalwell, I think is his name. It was supposed to be the most diverse field ever, but you had plenty of white men who were in the Democrat Party. The idea that the Democrat Party is going to have some kind of Haitian-style revolt, also that's a hoax. The idea that during the Haitian revolt, white people were banned from Haiti forever. White people run Haiti. That's something that, if you are really honest with yourself on the left-wing people will agree with. They'll say the reason why Haiti's so bad today is because white people run Haiti. And, they're not necessarily all of a Christian persuasion, and people can quibble over that. But, when you look at the German Haitians and you look at what the Clinton Foundation has done in Haiti, and you look at all the international control of Haiti, Haiti is not some kind of independent country. By the way, America's been sending people to Haiti to try to control that country for a very long time. You go back, I think in 1905, I just read about one of the first black generals, or I was looking at some of the early black military men of America in the 19th and 20th century, when we still had segregation. You still had these black men graduating from West Point, for example, these individuals, exceptions, and they were often sent to Haiti in order to figure out how to overthrow the government of Haiti. So America's been doing this for a long time. So the idea that we're going to have some Haitian-style revolt where all the white people are going to get wiped out, it's not true. Right? There are rich white people in South Africa. There are rich white people in California. Oh, California, it's a non-white tyranny. There are rich white people in California. Hawaii is a non-white state and majority, right? It's a white minority state. White people still run, and again, it's also people of a Jewish persuasion, but it's also people of a non-Jewish persuasion. White people aren't going to go away. The people who are going to be the safest, because there are a lot of white people who are going to go away, if you're not integrated into the system, there's going to be a lot of pressure that comes down on you. So it's not that all white people are going to be subject to these pressures, but that maybe a majority will. And those people, if they don't have an alternative grid, an alternative system in place to protect them, there's not much you can do in that situation, right? I mean, how are you going to have any kind of intergenerationality without a family? How are you going to have a family without marriage? How can you have an institution of marriage in a country which actively undermines marriage without some kind of community? How are you going to keep a community together when, social gatherings are made illegal? Unless you support Black Lives Matter, then it's okay. But social gatherings are for churches. I mean, I don't know what people's areas are like, but do a Google search for churches in your area and see how many of them are shut down. How are you going to keep a community together without religion, right? And so if you don't have those things, if you don't have a religious structure, it all kind of falls apart from there. That's the fundamental thing that keeps people together. So you either have to join the mainstream religion, which is academia, and that's going to include Black Lives Matter, that's going to include feminism. You're basically going to be a PhD, and you might stay within academia, you might branch out into the private sector, but you need to be integrated into that religious structure in order to have success in the entertainment industry, in order to have success in whether it's music or Hollywood or YouTube or Netflix or anything in the private sector. With the HR is basically the Inquisition, right? If you don't have the correct beliefs, HR is going to come after you, or at least you have to feign to have the correct beliefs. You have to pretend. When you had Benjamin Disraeli called himself a Christian. Now, did he really identify that way? You could say he, like many others, were practicing a form of crypsis, where they said, I'm going to pretend to be a Christian because otherwise I won't be allowed to hold any power. I won't be allowed to have this job. That's what's necessary. Is maybe you don't feel it in your heart, but you practice a form of crypsis, you kneel to the new religion, and then they allow you to have power. And there's a lot of white people who are going to take advantage of this, and who already are taking advantage of this, who basically control the Democrat Party to a large degree. And again, it's when people want to get into the, the donations and what religion really is it? Is Black Lives Matter really the religion that controls everything, or is that like a subcult of a different religion? That's an interesting question. But I don't think it's a situation where, if you have blonde hair and blue eyes, you're going to be rounded up for your physical characteristics. The real thing that they're persecuting for and coming people after for is, are you integrated into our religious structure? If you are, you can be like the Sackler family. They've got a bunch of blonde hair, blue eyes. You can be like, the Kushners who have married into the Trumps or whatever. You can be like Heidi Beirich, They're not coming after the physical characteristics, okay? They're not coming after your physical anthropology. They're coming after you if you have not proven your religious faith and loyalty to their cathedral or whatever house of worship you want to use as a metaphor. So that is the one way to react to what's going on, is to say, I need to stop watching these kinds of videos that you're watching right now. I need to totally distance myself from that. Some people are joining the military. The military is going to be just as religious as everything else. It's just a couple decades behind the times. The military was always a little bit more anti-gay than the rest of society. They've sort of caught up on that. It's always been a little bit more anti-trans than the rest of society. It's catching up on that. It's always been less diverse than the rest of society. It's catching up on that. So military's coming along. So people can join the military. People can go into academia. You can go directly into entertainment, into the private sector. But however you do it, you have to keep the idea of, you have to establish crypsis within this new religious framework, or you're going to be destroyed, or you're going to be eating the scraps. you're going to be eating the scraps. And that's what the working class is doing, where the jobs are destroyed by automation because no one at the top cares. And they're just making more money. You know, they made their net wealth increased 15%. Bezos and Musk and Zuckerberg, their net worth is increasing during the recession because they do insider trading where, oh, there's a recession coming, let's dump our stocks and then rebuy them all at the bottom and make a profit. So they don't care that people are losing their jobs. They don't care that we've gone from a country where the man can support a family on a single income, and now you can't support a family on 2 incomes. They don't care about that, and the standard of living for the average person is going to continue to decrease. And the ability to have kids is going to continue to decrease. The ability to have friends is going to continue to decrease. The ability to have a family or community or even the legality of going to church is going to decrease. So all these things are just going to get worse and worse and worse, and that's the reality of the situation. You can join in with the religious structure and gain insulation from these pressures. And there are a lot of people who are going to make a lot of money, and they're going to live in the Hollywood Hills, and they're going to live in California and Hawaii, and they're going to live in the most diverse parts of the country, and they're going to, gentrify areas, and they're going to be isolated from crime, and they're going to be isolated from the economic impacts, and they're going to be able to have families. And you look at the PhDs, the leftist professors, and they're having more kids than the working class. And the sociology professors having more kids on average than the, well, maybe not the sociology professors specifically, but professors as a class of people are having more kids, or PhDs, I should say, as a class of people, to be most broad and accurate with the data. PhDs as a class are having more kids than the plumbers and electricians, which just totally contradicts everything that Richard Lynn said. But that's the data that we have, right? So you can do that, and you can try to save yourself. And there are people who are going to be successful with that, and there are people like Musk, and there are people like Bezos who are going to rise to the top, people like Warren Buffett. People like the Trump family, they're going to rise to the top, and they're going to continue to have a big influence. And you can question to what extent they're going to have an influence versus other religious groups. Is it a 25 to 75 ratio? Is it 50-50? Is it 75-25? What exactly is the ratio there? That's up for debate. But there's certainly white people who are going to fill that niche. And so people can do that if they want to do that. I think for a lot of people, that's not realistic. If you're young, if you're a teenager and you haven't done anything, and you feel like you're in a condition where you can practice that sort of crypsis, that option is open to you. For people who have not practiced that kind of crypsis, and it's a pretty intense level that you need because there's no privacy afforded to people who are heretics, right? So if you've done anything in private that was non-cryptical, then you're going to have some problems. And when you sort of cross a certain threshold where there's no way to go back, where there's no way to say, I apologize and I want to, you look at the Christians, when someone offended against the faith, they would always say, oh, there's a possibility of forgiveness. We're going to kill you. But we're going to torture you until you confess to your sins, and then we'll kill you. That's what they would do. So there's always the possibility of forgiveness, but you're still going to get killed, right? That's the religious model. And so you can, at some point, recognize that if you've crossed a certain threshold, you can regret it. You can say it was an accident. You can say, oh, I wish I could just be like the guy in The Matrix where he takes the blue pill. He just wants to taste the good steak. And there are going to be people who do that and are successful, and maybe they come out the other side. And maybe those sorts of people, through practicing that crypsis, maybe like other groups that practice crypsis, maybe they come out the other side of this thing, and maybe they're able to rebuild, and maybe they can get to a point where they don't have to practice crypsis anymore. That's a very far-flung possibility, and again, people are going to do that. If you have the choice to do that, that's not something I can determine for you if you want to do that. But for people who feel that they can't do that for whatever reason, whether because they've crossed the threshold of religious opprobrium, or whether it's because they simply can't handle the idea of practicing crypsis, then the situation does look very bleak. And I think for a lot of people, it approaches either a kind of self-delusion into believing that a Trump-Tucker 1-2 punch is going to be effective, or that it's going to be productive. I'm not going to say it's going to be even counterproductive. I think there's like a true neutrality you need about it, where it's not an acceleration. I'm not trying to make the world worse, but I'm just understanding that these kinds of actions are not worth my time and energy to make the world better. And I'm trying to redirect that time and energy and the time and energy of other people to saying, okay, if we understand that we're in a situation where if you're not in this new religion, they're going to come after you in the same way the Inquisition did. And unless you practice crypsis, there's basically nothing that you can do effectively. You can't support, you're not going to get out of this through Trump. You're not going to get out of this through Tucker. What is the final option? What is the plan Z? After everything else has failed, crypsis has failed, okay, what do you do? What do you do when you are a Cathar? The Cathars were groups of heretics in Europe who basically survived in the southern mountains of France for quite a long time. And they had support of local nobility, and they had some bizarre beliefs, and the Catholic Church kept trying to organize the Albigensian Crusades and various military actions against them. They survived for quite a while. They eventually got wiped out to a certain degree, although there are some theories that they survived as esoteric religious groups through crypsis, which eventually morphed and sort of intermingled with the Knights Templar and the Freemasons. And so in that sense, the Cathars did survive to an extent, at least on an ideological level. Their Gnostic beliefs, some of their esoteric beliefs may have survived. That's what they did. They hunkered down, and they had a very religious, fanatical view of the world that they were not really constantly thinking all the time, how do we overthrow the Pope in Rome? What is our path forward? Who can we... I mean, they didn't have democracy as a distraction of who are we supposed to support this election? Who are we supposed to elect? They really hunkered down into their communities. They formed a fanaticism that meant that even though they could never beat the Catholics militarily, they could survive because the cost that they would impose on the Catholics was so great. Two examples would be Okinawa in World War II, when the Americans are invading these islands controlled by the Japanese, and the Japanese impose these very, very high costs on the Americans. Now, the Japanese eventually lose the war, but they had a kind of fanaticism where if they had retreated when they knew they weren't going to win the battle, they said, well, there's no way we can win, therefore let's just retreat. The war would have been over much sooner. The way that the war went on as long as it did is because the Japanese were willing to die to the last man, essentially. In Finland versus the Soviet Union, happening around the same time, Soviet Union invades, and the Finnish, through their tactics and their strategy and they had a kind of fanatical loyalty to defending their country. They were able to impose such high costs on the Soviets that the Soviets just said, this isn't worth it. This is basically what the Albigensians and the Cathars did, is they were so dedicated to defending themselves, they cared so little about, oh no, the Catholics are going to come kill us, we better run away, we better give up. They cared so little about that they were willing to do what was necessary. Now, some people will bring up the Vietnam War. Some people will bring up the war in Afghanistan. I think those were fake wars. I don't think those are really legitimate, in that I don't think the United States was really trying to win those wars. I think it was more of a massive field operation or training operation having to do with training the United States Army to learn how to be an occupying force dealing with a hostile population, which is very different from winning a war, right? Winning a war, you go in, you eliminate the resistance, first of all, you have to establish some kind of objective. Are we going to go in and take the oil? Are we going to go in and take the resources? Are we going to enslave the population, which is what ancient warfare was about? Are we going to wipe out the population, which is also a lot of what ancient warfare was about. So what's your goal going in there? And then you establish the force necessary to create that reality. That's not what Vietnam or Afghanistan was about. But a lot was accomplished during those wars in terms of creating domestic change in America, and in both of them, really. And also training the military to think in a different way. We're no longer a military force, we're now a police force. So big institutional changes occurred as a result in these kind of training grounds or these military exercises. A lot of people suffered and died. Of course, that really happened, but that wasn't the perspective of the military brass. Was not, they didn't care about that, right? That didn't even enter into their calculations. In fact, in some cases, they thought of it as beneficial to impose a kind of post-traumatic stress on American society, and maybe the Vietnamese as well, to experiment on them and to see how far we can push these people and what we can do and how we can mess with them, to tinker with the human mind, kind of like a Saw horror movie where you've got someone who's just, we consider like the serial killer as the height of evil, where he takes the victim in the basement and experiments on them. Buffalo Bill, Silence of the Lambs, right? The serial killer, and he's tinkering with the person, and he's tearing them apart. It's kind of what the government did to the American public during the Vietnam War, and to a lesser extent during Afghanistan, is tinkering with the public. We can create some conspiracy theories. We can mess with people. We can, teach them the earth is flat. We can run all of these kinds of psychological operations, and it's interesting to them. There's a practical function, of course, but I think they also get a kind of, it's almost you think of the early physicians who dissected bodies. They would dig up bodies from graveyards and they would dissect them and they would play with them. That's something that we accept as a normal part of scientific history, that it had to happen, that it should have happened, that has led to medical progress. Now we can live longer, now we can cure various diseases, and our surgical expertise is better. But when you think about the mentality that's necessary to dig up someone's loved one, and to then, you've got a rotting corpse that you're going to dissect and play with, you do have to have a kind of a callous and maybe even sadistic kind of scientific curiosity, where you look at the human body as an object, as a puzzle to be picked apart and rearranged. And this is essentially my view of the Vietnam War. But to get back on topic, that is the number 2 strategy. If you, for whatever reason, can't practice crypsis and get into that upper echelon, whether it's in academia, military, private sector, wherever, where you can have the economic means to insulate yourselves from crime and from divorce and from drug abuse and all of these maladies that are just going to wipe out significant portions of the population, if you can't do that, if you can't pursue that, then you have to recognize that when you live under a religious totalitarianism, which we've had before, we had in Christian Europe, we had during the Inquisition. If you live under a religious totalitarianism, which you could say the Jews lived under during the Roman Empire, you can practice crypsis, you can integrate yourself, which a lot of Jews actually did. They became Hellenized Jews like Herod, and they integrated themselves into Rome, and they actually did become very powerful and influential within Rome. Or you can be like the Jews of Masada, or the Maccabees before them during the Greek occupation, where you're a fanatic, where you're a martyr, where you no longer have this egoic attachment to your physical life. You're not really concerned about your future per se. You view the world as a test. You view the world as a trial. You're going to die anyway, right? You're a mortal person. And your purpose here on earth is not to win power. If you're the Jews of Masada, you're not trying to overthrow the Romans. If you're let's say you're the Cathars, the Albigensians, you're not trying to overthrow the Catholics. You no longer have a view of how do we win. That kind of goal is no longer in your head. Your goal is to grow closer to God. Your goal is to be pure. Your goal is to be holy. Your goal is to act in such a way as to seek reward in the afterlife. You look at the Islamic view of jihad, where you've got these fanatics who, they're not concerned whether they're going to live or die. They know they're going to die. They got a bomb strapped to their chest, so the death is certain. But they believe that there's something after death. And so that's how, because of that fanaticism, though they lack the resources, everything is against them, there's a lot of pressure against them, they're able to survive longer than if they had been cowardly and just given up. That's not an endorsement of violence, because of course you have groups such as the Buddhists during the Vietnam War who would light themselves on fire, right? So there's a kind of fanaticism which is also pacifist, which is not violently engaging in terrorism and striking out, but it's the willingness to basically do everything necessary to act in a way that's moral, where you're willing to die for your beliefs. Those are the only two paths, hot or cold. There's no middle path. There's no middle path where you're like, well, we're not going to be totally fanatical and religious. We're still going to be integrated somewhat into the system, but we're also going to be edgy enough to catch the attention of the system as heretics. You know, we're going to be in this space where, like, we support Donald Trump, and so we're integrated into politics, but at the same time, we're going to, you know, again, I guess that sums it up right there. If you support Trump, you've basically banned yourself. You've done a self-immolation from mainstream society, essentially. Like, you're not, I mean, right now we're in a transition space where theoretically we can conceive of someone who is a rich Trump supporter. I think that sort of thing is going to become impossible in the future. So I guess it's a matter of time. When you put yourself in that Trumpian space of, I'm going to make myself a target, but I'm also not willing to sacrifice everything. I still have goals. I still believe that there's some kind of winning condition. I still believe we can win the country back or win the GOP or whatever that is. When you put yourself in that space, you set yourself up for disappointment, because you're not going to win via that strategy. And it's going to be a situation where you get blackpilled very quickly. Like, within a matter of years, we've seen since 2016, we have these people go back and forth and back and forth. We're for Trump, we're against Trump, we're for Trump, we're against Trump. And it's not really very productive. If people viewed Trump as a religious figure, where they felt it was necessary to support him despite the fact that he wouldn't accomplish anything, that would actually be more, I think, successful in my mind. I don't think he really is deserving of that kind of religious fanaticism. I don't think he's a holy man in any sense. But if you identified a figure, a charismatic figure who maybe wasn't like a cult leader, who wasn't going to accomplish anything politically, but could act as a locus of moralization during a time of pressure, that can allow people to withstand pressures. I mean, again, it's not about, I think in the new military context that we live in, where you have grasshopper-sized robots that can, you know, act as drones and detonate bombs, and we've got all this military technology that's literally been designed for years and years and years, decades, to deal with the kind of terroristic threats that some people would support. So I don't think that's a valid kind of resistance. But I think that having the mindset of you're willing to live in you're like the Vietnamese willing to live in a tunnel. You know, you're willing to give up all your worldly possessions for the sake of living in such a way that is getting right with God. And so you're not caring about any of those material things. I think there is this kind of bifurcation where a lot of people are stuck in the middle of like, well, I still want to have my normal life, but I also want to be a bit edgy, and I also want to rebel against the system. We're coming to a point where you can't have it both ways. You're either going to have to be fully in lockstep with the system and say nothing contradictory. We're losing our free speech, where it's a one-party state, one-party rule. There's no alternative. They're going to continue to give it the name Democrat and Republican, I'm sure, but you know, the illusion is going to become weaker and weaker and more superficial. And there's still going to be leftists who, you know, even when the Republican Party has a Herman Cain or some kind of, who's the other black guy, who's the sleepy one? I forget what his name is. Ben Carson. You know, they'll put up a Ben Carson, they'll put up a Herman Cain, and the left will still say Republicans are white supremacists. We have to fight the whites. I mean, they'll have I forget the TPUSA guy now too. I don't have track of all these names, but the gay Republican who was a Democrat 4 years ago and now he's a Republican. They'll put up some gay black man or a trans black man even, and the Democrats will still say they're white supremacists and we need to fight them. So as long as that dynamic exists, as long as you have the fanatics on the left who are going to hate the Republicans no matter what, and they're going to be on a religious crusade, then the Republicans are going to say, oh, look at the radical left. They're going to come for your guns. They're going to come for your free speech. Meanwhile, like, we don't have free speech. Meanwhile, people are put in jail for hate speech. They're going to say, oh, well, this is the most important election of our lives, which they've been saying for a long time. But, if we get this Supreme Court, if we don't get another Gorsuch or another Kavanaugh, who, by the way, are left-wing judges, if we don't get them to support, more spying and, to support all this stuff, I mean, it's going to continue to be this ridiculous gladiatorial clown show where you've got two people who are left-wing, and one of them is calling the other a Nazi, and the one is saying, oh, well, we're just moderates, and society's really gotten crazy, hasn't it? We're just going to continue this cycle like you've been stuffed into a washing machine and you're just spinning around indefinitely. It's going to be indefinite until the system breaks down, or the charade is ended and we just have like a true one-party rule where someone just abolishes democracy, and that's when things really get interesting. So yeah, those are the two strategies. You either hunker down completely and you stop caring about material success, you stop caring about victory on this planet. This planet is like a video game. You're not here to win the game. You're not here to be king of the earth. You're here to show your loyalty to God, or whatever it is, to your religion, to your ethos. You're just not caring about those things anymore. And it doesn't mean that at the same time that you don't. I think the Connor Murphy stuff is interesting, where he's putting forth this ethos of like, I have no egoic attachments, but while I'm here on this earth, I'm going to make money, I'm going to have fun, I'm going to accomplish things. That attitude, when someone reaches that attitude of detachment, where they no longer really care about the negative things that are going to happen, like you're going to lose this and that and the other, they're willing to sacrifice everything, and they reach a kind of equilibrium. That is, I think, the spirit of the early Christians, they were surviving, they were building their communities, but at the end of the day, when the Romans came for them and put them in the gladiatorial arena with the lions, they were just at total peace. And you can't say that about these people who are having these freakouts and hysterics. I hear people, and I feel bad for them. It's like, it's 2020, it's been 4 years since Trump, and I still hear people telling me, like, is it really that bad? Like, and I don't want to make fun of people, because as much as I can criticize the elite for being callous, I feel maybe I understand them, because sometimes I don't fully. It's not the easiest for me to empathize with people, and sometimes I forget what it's like to be in that position, because it's been a very long time since I've been freaking out about, oh gosh, are the Democrats really? Are they really going to win? Is it really all over? It's like, yeah, this is the time. We've reached a new religious paradigm. The style of Christianity that existed for a while is not viable anymore. There's a new form of Christianity called liberalism or whatever, leftism, I don't know. The label, the branding will probably need some work. The early Christians didn't call themselves Christians. Maybe I don't know what they call them, brothers in Christ or whatever they call themselves. The branding's going to change a little bit. You can either join up with that, or you can say, you know what, I'm not concerned with winning, I'm concerned with doing what's right. And those are two different things, right? Winning involves bowing to the system, doing what it asks, and you get rewarded, and you get money, and you get the nice house, and you get the women, and you get the car, and you get the clout, and you have kids, and you have a family, and you have a gated community, and you have the private school, And there's a lot of treats dangling there for you, like when Satan goes to Christ and he tempts him and he says, I can make you king of the world. It's true. You can be king of the world. You can be on top. You can be president of the United States. I'm sure we're going to have another white man as president of the United States. And although I've argued it won't be Tucker, it might as well be Tucker, because he's not going to change anything fundamentally. I mean, he'll probably be impeached or something if he gets in. They almost got it with Trump. It was like they were like one vote away from it. You think that they're not going to impeach Tucker if he got in, which I don't think he will. But you can either care about that and stress out about that, and there's a lot of people who want you to stress out. I see people like Newt Gingrich who are like, they want to fire up your fight or flight. They want to make you scared. They want to make you afraid. They want to present all this information as like, but you got to fight back. You got to donate. You got to participate. You got to vote. You got to knock on doors. You got to dedicate your life to fighting the Democrats and freak out about this. And if you don't support our moderate candidate because he's the pragmatic, realistic, can-do candidate, then everything's going to collapse. So Western civilization and all this stuff. It's like, no. You either integrate yourself with the system and you go along to get along, or you understand that resistance in a material sense is futile. Like there's no way to win. There's no winning condition. And you're just focused on living in life as selflessly as possible and trying to get closer to God in your short time on earth. Those are like the two options. And people want to confuse them, and they want to tell you that there's some kind of middle way or middle path between those. That and it's not to say that, like, again, we look at these historical examples. Once you reach that point of fanaticism, then it is possible for survival to happen, right? We can see fanatical groups that were capable of survival. But if you're not fundamentally fanatical, if you're kind of in this lukewarm space of like, the Democrats are going to destroy everything, but I'm not willing to join a church. I'm not willing to found a community. I'm not willing to sacrifice. I'm not willing to do all these things because I'm scared. What if this isn't the right thing? What if this isn't the right community? What if this isn't the right people? What if our ideology needs work or something like that? If there's a lot of people who are stuck in a space of just being totally freaked out all the time, that the sky is falling, the world is collapsing, and we have to do something. And every time you sort of provide them with a solution, or you provide them with like, hey, here's something that we could do, it's like, oh no, here's why that won't work. And I've engaged in that. I've engaged in that kind of skepticism. And you could say I'm even engaging in it with respect to Tucker. The reason I would make a counter argument is that I don't think Tucker is religious. I don't think he's fanatical. And I think what I'm saying is the skepticism in terms of solutions, we need to stop thinking in terms of solutions. There is no solution. To solute, relating to dissolve, means you have a problem, you have a solution, and then the problem goes away. All right? So the idea of what's the solution, that would be like, you're a 5-year-old, your parents put you in timeout. What's the solution? The solution, you have two options as a toddler. You can, as a 5-year-old, I suppose, you can listen to your parents, follow your parents, and integrate into their system. That's one way to deal with it. Or you can kick and scream and whine and complain and put up as much resistance as possible, and you're just going to get put in timeout anyway. You're just going to get, put in your room or whatever. You don't have the power. If you're a 5-year-old, you just don't have the power to resist in a meaningful material way. You can resist psychologically. You can say, I don't consent, and nobody can take that from you. If you truly refuse to consent to the system as it is, no one can force you. If you're a fanatic about it, you can be stubborn, and no one's ever going to convince you, and no one can ever change your mind. They can hurt you, they can take things away from you, but they can't take your soul, your essence, your spirit, and they can't take that away. So those are your two options when you're facing overwhelming odds, is you can go along with the overwhelming odds, or you can resist them, understanding that there is no solution. There is no, okay, we're going to overcome this, and there's a new government, we're going to elect Tucker, it's going to be a different situation. That's just not the situation, right? Some situations don't have those kinds of solutions. Sometimes you're in a situation where there is no, like if you play chess, at some point you get into the game where the position is lost, meaning you could make the perfect moves, the best moves, the most amazing moves. You could calculate, you could have a supercomputer, right? The deep AI machine. I don't even know what they're called. What is it? Fishhook? I don't remember what they're called. But in any case, you have like Google, and it's like every supercomputer in the world is calculating all the billions of moves that can be made in chess. But if your position is lost, like if you're down in your position, there is no winning move. You could have all the supercomputers in the world, all the mental power concentrated on that, but you just be wasting time and energy. The position is lost. And so there are two choices. You can resign the game and you can say, you know what, you win, and that's equivalent to joining the system. Or you can play out the position and refuse to cooperate. You can play out the position. You can say, I'm not going to go along. I am not going to go along with your winning position. I'm going to put up as much resistance as possible, and I know I'm going to lose. I know I'm going to die. I know you're going to kill me, but I'm not playing for the purpose of winning. I'm playing for the purpose of honor. I'm playing for the purpose of loyalty. I'm playing for the purpose of whatever you would, and that has to be religious, and that has to be fanatical. So people who are still looking at the winning condition, they're still looking at what's the solution. There is no solution. There is no solution. I don't know how many times they need to say that, but it comes to an existentialism of, can you live forever? No. Is there a pill you can take to live forever? No. Is there a surgery? Is there a brain transplant? Is there a cloning technology? What can I do to live forever? There's no solution to the problem of living forever. You could say many people have pursued it for a long time, the Philosopher's Stone, or say the medical technology we have. There are people who pursue it. As of yet, there's no solution. Maybe some future generation will figure it out. I doubt it. But there is no solution. So you either give up and you say, okay, well, if I can't live forever, then I'm just going to YOLO, be as hedonistic as possible, as much partying, drugs, sex, everything. I'm just going to have as much pleasure as possible before I die. There are a lot of people who do that, and to an extent, there is something more reasonable about that than the person who's like, oh, I'm just going to live my life and I'm just going to keep searching for that Philosopher's Stone. Then you have the people who say, I know I'm going to die, and therefore I'm not trying to live forever, but I'm trying to live my short life in the way that's best. So whether we're talking about politics or just existentialism in general, it's pretty much the same situation. You've got people who join up with the system, which on the individual level is hedonism, or you've got people who resist the system, which on the individual level is, choosing those actions which you think have heavenly significance rather than earthly significance. You do that which is right in the eyes of heaven, not that which is right in the eyes of earth, because your life on earth is certain to pass away. But the treasures you put in heaven, those are real. The earth that we live on is a Maya. It's a simulation. And what comes next is determined by how we act here in this life. So those are the two options. If you haven't reconciled yourself to that, if you're an atheist Trump voter, I feel very bad for you, because from your perspective, your life means nothing. But at the same time, you're totally freaked out about the Democrats. And every day is very stressful, right? Because you're constantly reading the news. You're constantly reminded, we're losing. Oh no, I'm blackpilled again. At some point, it becomes ridiculous. At some point, it becomes melodramatic. At some point, it's like either join the system and be done with it, or understand that this is not real, right? The idea that we're trying to win and take over the country, take back the country, that's not realistic. That's not in the cards. People who are doing that are going to face some very bad consequences. They're going to go to jail, And when they are in jail, they're going to be very sad. They're not going to have that kind of religious faith to sustain them. I mean, that's hard for anybody, but especially people who are atheists, who believe in nothing, who don't believe in a spiritual aspect to these things. I guess the compromise maybe is if you're a religious person who nonetheless is going to be politically involved. I mean, that's an interesting proposition, but you have to get your priorities straight. If you say, you know what, I don't care what happens here on earth, I'm just trying to live as a moral person, as a consequence, I'm involved with politics, that's a different prioritization than this is the only life we have to live, and if we don't win here and now and defeat the Democrats, then everything's over. There's a very different psychological state to be in. When you feel that, you've already, it doesn't matter what the outcome is, we're just trying to do our best, versus if we don't win, everything's over. Two very different ways of looking at the world. They might, in some ways, cross paths in terms of the actions that people take. They might vote for the same political candidate, or they might have similar habits or whatever. But I think the very different mindset that's going to lead to very different results. That is all. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.